Ready, set, go. Good evening, Jenny Reach, Dr. Tom Reach.
Good evening.
How y'all doing tonight?
Doing amazing.
I appreciate you guys coming over, fighting the traffic and the long battle to get here. I commend your determination to make it, right? Got dealt a little bit of a curveball, but we're here and we're doing it.
Well, I would have driven half again as long to get drugs. So
boom. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
You can't stop us.
That's right. So me and Jenny were just talking before we were kind of getting settled in, and she was like, how did we come across your radar to like invite me on? Like, how did that even happen? And I alluded to the fact that there may be a little bit of history, and I told her that I was not going to disclose that until we sat down. And so my question for you, my first question, are you ready?
Well, shoot.
My first question is, what do you know about the book Dharma Bums? Have you ever read the book Dharma Bums? Think about it.
I think it was sent to me in the mail.
Okay. Tell me more.
So there was a forward book thing, like Pay It Forward book group that I was a part of. Am I on the right trail?
You're going down the rabbit hole, yeah.
And so I was given 2 or 3 different 5 people's addresses to send my favorite books to, and then like my email would be, or my address would be given to someone else to receive 5 books
That's correct.
from total random people.
I sent you a book in like 2016.
I think it's still in the trunk of my car.
Is it? You
Yeah.
never read it?
No, I still have it. No,
Okay.
it's in my car to like read when I get stuck somewhere.
Yeah. You could have read it when you're on your
Wow.
way here. Yeah, so in way back in like 2000, let me just take a step back. I moved to North Carolina in February of 2015 from Florida, like right out of a treatment center, like 2 weeks out of the treatment center. Checked out of the treatment center. I cleared some things up with my probation officer, meaning I paid him what I owed him. Right. And I packed my things and I moved up here. And I moved up with my significant other who was still using at the time. And I was able to make that last about 14 months before the wheels came off of that,
That's
surprisingly.
a pretty long time.
I know. I was a student and I had like activities to like keep me busy. But we ended up parting ways about 15 months later, and I broke my leg and my foot like 2 or 3 weeks after the breakup. My leg and my foot and my ankle, a bunch of pins and things put into a major surgery. I couldn't walk or put any weight on it for 90 days. No weight, no nothing. And being in recovery, I wasn't taking any type of opiates.
Sounds like your significant other was really pissed.
It was a rough, yeah. It was the most like
Talk about a breakup.
Yeah, I was faced with some serious, significant challenges, pretty early on, and so once I went back to Florida, stayed at my brother's house for those 90 days to heal up because I couldn't drive, I couldn't get around. I live up on a cabin about 4,000 feet up in Cashiers, Glenville area, not too far from here. And when I moved back to North Carolina, I don't know how, but throughout my entire like active addiction, like I stayed away from social media and I never joined or had an account. I was like,
no one has time for social media
when you're using it.
it.
Yeah, I was ghosted off of that thing. But I found out that there's a lot of like active recovery groups on like Facebook and stuff, and like there's a lot of information out there. I mentioned I was a part of the Refuge Recovery Fellowship, and so I found out that they were sharing a lot of information. Refuge Recovery was, as an organization, a lot of the information was being shared. It was such a new kind of thing, and a lot of information that I wasn't privy to if I wasn't on social media. So I decided to like join. Then I'm moving back. I didn't really know a whole lot of people. We parted ways with the only person I really knew up here. And so like I just dove into these like Facebook groups and I sent like hundreds of friend requests to anybody and everybody that appeared to be in the recovery circles, because I was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it the right way. And I'm going to actively engage myself with and surround myself with people who are choosing to live the same type of lifestyle. And somehow, one of those, you were one of the people but who I became, air quotes, friends with. Somehow I got into this book sharing club thing, and they said to send somebody like one of your favorite books, and they sent me a name and an address to mail it to. And the only reason why I was able to put this all together is because your name and your P.O. box is still like in my, I didn't know it saves it, but it's still in my Amazon delivery.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? Like when I asked you, like, where do you want to ship the package to? Like your name's still in there. And so like I put it together when I ordered something like a couple months back. I was like, oh, wait, hang on a second. And then I could click on it and see like what it was. And it was The Dharma Bums by Jack Kerouac, which was a book that came recommended to me through, if you're like, there's like way back when I first started, there was a list of like, if you're interested in Buddhism, meditation, that sort of thing, these are like your 5 must reads, you know, and that was one of them. And it was a fantastic book. And so I was like, that's the book that I'm going to pass on. So instead of like sending you my copy, I just went on Amazon and just ordered one. And
That's what you're supposed to do when you give someone a book.
Yeah.
Keep your own copy.
yeah,
give
for
them a
sure.
different one.
For sure. So that's the whole story.
But
That's
yeah,
how-
I've read a lot of Jack Kerouac. So like, yeah, I
On the
have read the book.
Road and-
Exactly. And I don't know, he's an author I really, really like. So like, I remember the book. I never thought of where I got it from.
Yeah, well, it probably didn't say, like there probably wasn't a.
Yeah, no,
I think I
there's-
clicked like gift or something, so it doesn't tell you like anything in it, like a price point. They don't put a receipt in it or whatever,
Yeah.
you know. So very cool. So that's what
crazy.
Yeah, isn't that
It
crazy?
is crazy.
And then here we are. And I just checked before you guys, when I was sitting here waiting, I just checked and it was like sometime in like the summer or fall of 2016. So that was like 2.5, coming up on 3 years ago. Now we finally get to meet face to face
Finally.
to talk about recovery and to talk about what life's like, you know? So I guess all that big buildup to get to this point where I invited you on because we were friends on social media. You had sent me an invitation to like y'all's Facebook page, Reach Recovery. And nowadays you got to be careful and look around before you click on anything these days. And so I checked out your page and obviously followed it. And I was interested in what you guys are doing. So what is Reach Recovery?
Jenny?
Reach Recovery is a doctor's office that specializes in addiction treatment with a 12-step component and really focusing on like the entire person, and not just looking at the addiction part, but helping with like the psychosocial, mental stability, and like we like to treat the whole person and not just the one thing that addicts think they need help with, which is the drug problem.
I think that's a pretty good summary.
Is that a good summary?
Yeah,
There we go.
Boom.
Boom.
We use medication-assisted therapy, and it's just one of the many components that's involved. Because the first thing I tell patients is I look at them, I said, "You're really confused about this. You see, all this time you thought you had a drug problem. You don't have a drug problem." "Well, yeah, doc, I really do." I said, No, you're way wrong. You don't have a drug problem. You got a brain problem. Your brain's broken. You've got a disease. It's actually called chronic dopamine reward deficiency syndrome, CDRDS. It's
Okay.
actually a moniker that I coined myself.
I'm going to need you to break that down for me.
Chronic dopamine reward deficiency syndrome. An addict's brain does not make enough dopamine. They don't feel good. They always hurt. They always ache. We don't like crowds. We're not comfortable in our own skin, right? We go to a party, we don't know where to stand. And our lives were miserable. And we wondered, my life always going to be miserable? And I remember distinctly, I was 13 years old, and I had already been smoking weed and smoking cigarettes and had a few drinks, but somebody prescribed me a narcotic for my knees. I had a problem with my knees. And it said take 2 every 4 hours. And I took 2, and I looked around and said, holy shit, is this how all the rest of you people feel all the time? If it says take 2 every 4 hours, I think 4 every 2 hours might be better. And at age 13, I was a narcotics addict. Absolutely no question about it. So people don't make enough dopamine, and they'll do anything they can to increase the dopamine. All addictions are based on the final common pathway of dopamine in the brain. Whether it's internet addiction, sexual addiction, gambling, everything comes down to dopamine. So chronic dopamine reward deficiency syndrome, you can now see that published. I didn't publish it, but others took the name. And I tell the patients this, I said, you got a brain problem. So what you really need more than anything else is to be brainwashed, right? And I get a laugh, right? They go, really? I said, yeah, but not by me. Oh, no. You have to be brainwashed by
Yourself.
yourself. That's why we go to 12-step meetings. You don't have to take what they say hook, line, and sinker. You don't have to believe in somebody else's God. But if you'll go to the meetings on a regular basis, it will literally, physically rewire your brain. It's called neural repatterning, neural plasticity. That's why we emphasize 12-step recovery. All right, now, it's the cheapest recovery in the world. You throw a buck in the basket if you want. There's
If you can't afford it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, no reason to spend $40,000 at an inpatient facility when you can go to meetings. Not dissing inpatient rehab. I think inpatient rehab is critical and necessary for a lot of people. But real recovery you get by sitting in the groups, sitting in the rooms. That's where you get it. There's a lot of ways to go about neural repatterning, right? Meditation, prayer, going to the Buddhist temple, daily reading. Get your just for today, read it every day. Get your one day at a time, read it every day. Put on your earbuds, and instead of listening to the same crap you listen to all the time, go to NA speakers online. Listen to Billy A. out of Boston. Listen to that guy out of West Virginia as he talks about running up and down the hollers.
Listen to the NC Raw podcast.
There you go.
Got to get my cheap plug.
Go ahead, man. But all of this information that's going into your brain is working toward this neural repatterning. And so we put strong emphasis on this. Whenever a patient comes in, my first question out of my mouth, and they know what I'm going to say, what have you done this week for your program of neural repatterning, right? From a biblical perspective, in this area, a lot of people go to church, a lot of people have faith. I say, listen, you go to Romans chapter 12, verse 2, right? You know what it says there? It says, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's it right there, neural repatterning. So we do a lot of that at Reach Recovery.
Yeah. Now, how did this come together? Where did this idea come from? How did Reach Recovery come to life?
It's his brainchild.
His brainchild?
I started working as a peer support for a larger company that he started. I got my peer support certificate, I think, a year and a half into my recovery. I was coming up on 2 years. And as soon as I got my peer support, the hiring manager at this company called me. She was actually my very first sponsor when I was 19, and I tried to get clean for the first time. She was working with this company and found out that I had just gotten this certification and gave me an interview, and I got a job as a peer support, sitting with the patients and offering them support, holding hope for them, because I had been on medicated assisted treatment before I got clean. And so I have experience with the exact same thing that they're going through. So I started as a peer support for this other company before Reach Recovery became a thing.
And before peer support became a thing.
It had
Or at the
already
same time.
started.
Same
It had
time.
already started. But so when I came in at entry level, There were people who had been working at this company for 3 years where I was at the same level they were because of my peer support education. So I like kind of walked into it with a foot in because I already knew a lot of the stuff that people were just learning about. I mean, I'm just the peer support and the office manager.
Yeah.
That's all I do.
That's a key role, though, right?
I just do all the work.
Yeah.
Jenny often spends more time with the patient than I do, right? And when I first opened, I opened Watauga Recovery Center in Johnson City, Tennessee. Everything was emphasizing 12-step recovery, in-house meetings, and we didn't have peer support back then, so we created what we called our Intentional Recovery Education Program, and it was based on Wayne Dyer's book, The Power of Intention. And that book has been instrumental in everything that I've done in my recovery in my life. Wayne has passed away now, but he was in active recovery for over 25 years. And that book was critical toward founding intentional recovery and our peer support system. But in other clinics and other facilities, often the doctors are not in recovery.
Yeah.
So, doctors like that are going to get conned. I mean, you go to the doctor's office, what are you doing? You're going to get dope, right? And if you hit a doctor who doesn't know anything about recovery, he's going to get snowed right over. So you put a peer support specialist in there.
That's where I come in.
And that's a built-in
bullshit detector. And I say it straight to their face. I'm like, here, I'm an advocate for you. If you're honest with me and tell me what's going on, I will go up to bat for you and I will fight for you, but you got to be honest with me. And I was like, on the other side of that, so I'm a built-in bullshit detector. You can't bullshit a bullshitter, and I'm one of the best ones out there. So just be honest with me, all right? And it always gets a smile from them, and they're always like, okay. There was one patient who was all like, why do you think I'm bullshitting you? And 2 years later, she's like one of our best patients. Like, she's really good. But like at first it was hard to deal with because she's like, why are you calling me on my bullshit? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And but most patients really receive it very well.
Yeah. You talked about kind of various pathways, right? You kind of hit on a couple like key components to that neural rewiring of the brain.
Sure.
And I'm a huge proponent on that sort of like empowering the individual to kind of build their pathway to recovery. Like, what is it that you need in your life that's going to work? Like, you're the one that knows what will or will not work for you. Once you kind of clear the fog through like detox or medication or whatever it is, ultimately it's going to be up to you because this is a lifelong commitment. Like, can I commit to going to 12-step meetings for the rest of my life? Can I commit to a daily meditation practice for the rest of my life? Like, what are the components that will work for you as the individual? And so I say that in getting to like how do you help facilitate that identification process? Because you did talk about emphasizing a 12-step model or some sort of fellowship like that. Like, how do you navigate those waters with an individual?
You pretty much have to take them where they are.
Yeah.
That everyone's coming in from a different perspective. Many of our patients have never been to a 12-step meeting, which to me is shocking.
Crazy, yeah.
They've been on streets of Suboxone for 2 years, and they come in to finally try to get help and get better, and they've never been to a 12-step meeting.
And a lot of them are terrified because the only idea they have of a 12-step meeting is from like the media, right? Of like everyone
Movies.
standing in a group and you standing up and telling your whole
Smoking
story the
and
first
drinking
time.
coffee, yeah.
And like everyone's like, I don't want to go there and talk to people. And I'm like, you don't have to. Go in there and just sit and like listen.
That's okay.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people that are just scared because their only idea of a 12-step meeting is something that just is all false.
Yeah.
But I guess like what I do is like I help them identify certain stressors in their life, like certain things that are causing issues, especially since like being on medicated assisted treatment, relapse happens. So usually whenever like someone reports that it's happened, like we kind of go back a few days And it's like, so tell me about, 3 days before this happened. And we try to come up with identifiers of got in a fight with my girlfriend, or I have financial issues, I don't know if I could pay my rent, right? And all this stress or this and this is what built up for what to happen. And then I help guide them to find, their tools. And then if they don't have any, I put out an array. So so here's some breathing exercises that could help you. Here's the daily meditation from the 12-step program you could try. I actually took a stress management class in college last year, and I had to build a stress management toolkit that has guided meditations, breathing, like a list of 100 suggestions you can do when you can't sit with yourself, like do a puzzle, go for a walk, all that stuff. And so I encourage them to come up with their own ideas. It's kind of like just guiding them through the waters of trying to find what's going to work best for them, and then giving suggestions here and there. I drop the 12-step program suggestion probably once an appointment for each patient.
Sure.
But I always try to come up with other options.
Yeah.
He really pushes the meetings.
Sure.
Well,
it works.
Worked for me.
Yeah. And that's what my next
But
question was.
Doesn't work for everybody.
Would be like, where do you stand? Like, where do you draw the line with self-disclosure, and how much of your story are you incorporating into those conversations?
I always ask permission first. It's, hey, can I share this with you? This was my experience. Just to give them the option of saying, no, I don't want to hear what you have to say.
I don't give them that option.
That's the difference. That's the difference in training. I have been trained appropriately. And then I will share a small piece of my story and how I got through it, and this is what helped me. And not all of it is 12-step based. The other piece is that I always say 12-step program because I am a member of Narcotics Anonymous. I stick very closely to the traditions, and that's all about attraction, not promotion.
Yeah.
And that tradition stands out the most for me in my job because it's a very thin line. Because we have NA literature in our office, but when I suggest it, I talk about 12-step programs. Or other recovery meetings. I also talk about SMART recovery and celebrate recovery and refuge recovery because the 12-step program can be very unappealing when you look at God and faith and all of the words that are mentioned in it. So for a lot of people, they are just completely turned off at the thought of religion. And so being well, why don't you try a refuge recovery? It's meditation based. And then give them a website so they can look up the literature and stuff like that.
That's exactly. I have a dozen patients that have tried 12-step meetings and have decided that they wanted a different route. So I've guided them in a different route. I said, okay, well, let's start with this. And I'll hand them a book. I say, this is Wayne Dyer's Power of Intention. This is Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. This is the Tao of Pooh. Let's look into the Tao, all right? And I've been able to help a lot of folks completely get their lives back without using 12-step recovery. And of course, I'm using 12-step principles. And
almost all those programs, they all use the same sort of 12-step principles. It's all there.
All of the same principles are there.
Yeah. Now, from a clinical standpoint, what we're really doing is motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah. We try not to label things, but functionally, that's what it comes down to. And we use some contingency management. We were able to get people, you get them feeling better, and they give them rewards for doing things for themselves to help themselves.
What about there's a big debate about MAT, specifically surrounding some of the 12-step fellowships. I see it online almost every day.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
The memes and the arguing and this and that. And so I guess my question, being someone who's not super educated in the 12-step world, how do you, when you're working with a client, you're talking to somebody and you're presenting these options to them, and say they go and have a uncomfortable experience because of the stigma surrounding MAT.
So one of the things that I tell my patients, well, first, people who share those memes, you should talk to your sponsor.
Please. They're everywhere. You just can't get away from them, man.
And I know that's like a sarcastic opinion or whatever, but
it's
like, talk to your sponsor.
She looked dead in the camera too when she said that.
All right, let's call it what it is. MAT is an outside issue. You're going to the doctor, you're receiving medication for a disease process. That's nobody's business. And I tell the patients, you don't talk about that in a meeting.
Yeah.
Now, over in Johnson City, there's a guy that always has to get up and talk about, we don't do that damn doctor dope, right? Yeah. And one time I called him out.
And you're sitting in the room as the doctor.
Oh, yeah, and he knew I was sitting there.
Thank you, Kendall.
And so I piped right up, and I won't give his name, but I'm tempted to. And I said, well, I'm Tom. I'm an addict. Hi, Tom. Yeah, I got a question. My doctor prescribed me Viagra, and I tried it. It doesn't seem to be working right. And I'm wondering if anybody give me some advice on about this medicine. You know, and I get laughs and stuff. That's an outside issue. I said, exactly. It's an outside issue. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
You know, we don't talk about medications in this meeting. And you get some pushback. But all silliness aside, right? I don't care how you get clean.
I don't either.
A drug addict, it never shocks me when a drug addict does drugs, right? Patient comes in, they're all shameful. Go, oh, doc, my sister gave me a Xanax. It's like, yeah, and you took it, right? That doesn't shock me that a drug addict does drugs. What shocks me is when a drug addict doesn't do drugs, right? That's the miracle. And if you get clean through Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, if you get clean through 12-step recovery, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychiatry, if you get clean and you're not doing drugs, you're a miracle. You're a miracle. And I applaud that.
So what I say to my patients when I talk about 12-step recovery is, I mean, MAT is medicated assisted treatment. And there are busloads of people in treatment in meetings. And that's what I tell them. And that's what I tell people who bring up the issue. I was like, they're not just on Suboxone, they're on medicated assisted treatment, and you don't tell people who are coming from treatment centers not to be in the meetings. And I tell my patients that like they don't have to tell anybody that they are in treatment and that they're getting help from a doctor. I always reference our the literature in times of illness, where it says very clearly if you are taking medicine prescribed to you by a doctor as prescribed, then you're doing what you're supposed to do. Because doctors went to school and spent thousands of dollars and many years of their life to be able to do that. And I think that like once a patient puts their trust in a doctor after revealing everything that they know, like, hey, I have a problem with this, I have an addiction, this is my issue, and the doctor decides to prescribe them whatever, that's their treatment plan. And we set up treatment plans for people who go to inpatient treatment, and MAT is outpatient treatment. And what I tell our patients is like, the doctor's going to make your body feel better, and then you have to put in the work to make your head feel better. And that's when we apply these new tools. And what we're doing is we're just basically making our patients stable enough to be able to get new information and apply it without being dope sick and vomiting on themselves. And I really think that has a lot of value. You are capable of learning more when you don't have the chills and the sweats, right? So like, I tell my patients, you know, if you go into a meeting, you don't have to say anything. You don't even have to introduce yourself. It's no one's business that you're in treatment. The point is that you're trying to get help. You're there for recovery, they're there for recovery, and that's all that matters.
Exactly.
Um,
They've earned their seat.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it. Was there any point in your career where there was like a shift in the way that you approached it and you began to work with MAT?
I'm a diehard fundamentalist big book thumper. But it was a long road to get there. You know, as I mentioned, I was using drugs at a young age, and when I was 19, I had a religious experience, and I was able to stay off of drugs for several years to get into medical school. And in medical school, you know, I couldn't perform. I was struggling, and Jesus drank wine, so I thought I'd drink some wine, right? So I drank some more wine, and then I drank beer, and then I was smoking pot, and then it was right off to the races again. And by the time I got into my internship, I had found the needle. I quit internship because it was getting in the way of my using, and I went out to work in the coal fields of Southwest Virginia. I was intervened on, and I went into my first rehab, I guess it was 1989. It took for a while, and I managed to piece together almost 8 years. And surprisingly, I quit going to meetings. It's just a shocker there, but my sponsor told me I could quit going to meetings. But I was sponsoring myself at the time. So that was, and in very, very short order, my disease escalated dramatically. And I went home from work. I was working ER up in Virginia, and I went home from work and shot up my usual dose, and woke up intubated in the intensive care unit of the hospital where I had been working at 6 hours earlier. And that put a bit of a damper on my medical career. That was really poor form. So back into rehab, high dollar, expensive inpatient rehabs. Nothing worked, nothing took. I didn't get it. I was too smart for 12-step recovery, right? You can't be too dumb to get 12-step, but you can be too smart. How does this work? Why does this work?
I think you're right out of it.
It works really well. Just do it, you know? After going on tour and dealing dope and running all over the country, I finally took off for Mexico in 2001 to use drugs and die. I had lost my medical license, surrendered my credentials, and off I went to Mexico, and I was doing untoward things on the border, and it got ugly fast. And after a 4-day tequila binge, I woke up on the floor of this bed and breakfast, face down in my own puke, with this old fat gay guy kicking me in the ass, going, "Hey, you, hey, are you done? Are you done?" And I thought, man, everywhere you go, I knew exactly what he was talking about. And I kind of looked up in a blur, and I said, "Yeah, I guess I'm done." And he goes, "Well, that's good. The only English-speaking AA meeting for 400 miles meets tonight in this bed and breakfast. Are you coming?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess I'm coming." I didn't get clean that day, but April 19th, 2002, the last needle was broke. And I got clean and sober in Mexico going to AA and NA meetings. I learned Spanish really quick because I went to a lot of Spanish-speaking meetings. Never thought I'd practice medicine again. Came back to the States in 2003, worked at my brother's law office in Greenville, South Carolina. And everyone kept saying, "Man, you should really try to get your license back." I thought, man, they're never going to give me my license back. You know, I'm a 2-time loser. This is a dead end. But I was going to the Impaired Physicians Group and going to meetings every night. You know, I went to a meeting every day for over a year when I got clean. But I was a drug addict. You know, I don't know about you. I managed to figure out a way to use. I managed to figure out a way to use every day, right? And these people tell me they can't get to a meeting. You can't get to one meeting a week. Let me ask you a question. If there were 180 oxys down in Knoxville and we had to be there in 3 hours, you think you and I could figure out a way
make
to
it.
get there?
We'd make it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't go to one meeting? Anyway.
I'd hotwire a helicopter and be there in about 45 minutes.
Yeah. So anyway, I went to Lexington, Virginia, and I started working as a tutor at VMI, and I worked as Igor in the Haunted Monster Museum in Natural Bridge, Virginia. And my wife, Maggie, Mexican lady, came back with me from Mexico with our newborn baby, who's now 16. I got to wear this top hat in these little dark John Lennon glasses and a three-piece suit. I am Igor, and I will be your guide. Please do not get separated while you're in the house. I couldn't possibly put you back together if you weren't separated.
You still got the role, man.
Best job I ever had in my life, man. And Maggie ran the scares behind the scene. And anyway, I had to get retested. I had to go through retraining. And finally, I got my license back in May of 2005 with the condition that I finished the residency that I had dropped out of that was getting in the way of my using. So I came to Johnson City, Tennessee, East Tennessee State, and I did a family practice residency. And I finished that in 2007. And I worked ER for about 3 years. And then I decided that, and I had looked at medication-assisted therapy the whole time I was working ER. And I thought, well, I'm going to get into that. I'm going to do it right. Because I'm going to get these people off of Suboxone in 6 months, and we're not going to prescribe this. We're not going to do that. And I was very, very strict and very, very rigid. So I opened up a small practice in 2010 called Watauga Recovery Center. And 7 years later, there were 11 facilities in 4 states. We had 40 docs working for us, 100 employees. I was board certified in addiction medicine, board certified in family medicine. I was appointed to the legislative committee of the American Society of Addiction Medicine, and I'm now the past president of the Tennessee Society of Addiction Medicine. I helped write the rules and regulations for OBOTs in Tennessee. I helped write the buprenorphine guidelines in Virginia, and I was actively lobbying in Washington as well. And I was able to sell that company to an outfit that was going to take full insurance to be able to increase access to care. That company's now called Revita, and they provide services to literally thousands of people in Virginia and Tennessee. And all of that under the licensure and the OBOTs. And I was able to carve out Reach Recovery to be able to keep this open in Asheville and take care of this small group of patients that I've cared for now for many, many years.
Yeah. Let's take a step back.
That's the story.
And let's talk. I want to know about this path of redemption to regain your medical licensure. Initially, when you said you're working for your brother at an attorney's office. Mm-hmm. Initially, it sounded like that wasn't really something that was on your radar as far as pursuing.
I had pretty much given up hope on that, yeah.
And why do you think that is?
There's a whole lot of hoops. Mm-hmm. And when I sat down with a good friend of mine, Jerry Rosen, I was sitting there in Mexico, sitting up on the hill, smoking a doob, and he said, "Doc, what are you doing here?" And I thought, well, Jerry, I could probably get my medical license back, but here's what I'd have to do. I'd have to get completely clean and sober, go to meetings, go back to rehab, be reevaluated, apply to the board, be on probation, take the entrance exams again. And he looked at me, he said, "So what are you still doing here?" And I've never forgotten that. Jerry's passed away since then, but same thing happened when I got to Greenville, and I was going to Caduceus, and one of the leaders of addiction medicine physicians was Dr. Gregg, who used to work at Greenville General Hospital, and he looked at me, he said, "Tom, you should try to get your license back. We'll advocate for you." And that's what put me on the road. Yeah. So I knew there were going to be a lot of hoops. And
you think it was the work or the guilt and the shame from a little bit of both, maybe?
Yeah, I knew. Well, you have to tell your story over and over and over. Every time you fill out an application for a medical license or for a DEA certificate, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Have you ever lost your license for any reason? And you have to tell your whole story over and over and over. You get to where you just kind of do a one-page letter that explains everything, and you say, "See the letter," But
yeah. Having been to so many meetings, I'm sure that you participated in speaker meetings where you shared that story over and over, right?
It's different.
Different?
Talking about the guilt
in
and
front of a
shame of
panel
your past, of people who are supposed to be your peers, professional peers, that are judging you, compared to same last name person in the same room listening for the same emotional connection, compared to being judged by your professional peers of whether or not you're good enough to continue to do what you want to do.
But back to the original point, I got clean and sober through 12-step recovery. My sponsor was a hard ass, and he still is, and I still talk to him just about every day in Mexico. I would sit there and I'd say, Jim, I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck in Mexico, and Maggie's pregnant, and I don't have any way to make money. I was making $10 a day as an auto mechanic in Mexico. We had no electricity, no running water, 3 teenagers to care for in addition to the newborn. And Jim would say, well, you just do the next right thing. And I'd say, the next right thing, what's that? He said, sweep the floor. Okay, I'll sweep the floor, sweep the floor. So, I mean, it's the cleanest floor you've ever seen, right? And then I'd go, Jim, what do I do now? He said, you mop the floor. And then you chop wood, and then you carry water. And he gave me that book, and then he gave me that book. And he didn't just give me the 12-step literature. He gave me everything else I needed to reframe and to recreate that neural net that I needed. I didn't have an off switch back then. My off switch was my sponsor in my meetings, right? It takes a while to recreate that off switch. But I was diehard 12-step recovery by the book. And then I saw that it was only 11 to 17% successful. And I used to look at people and go, well, you know, it's 100% successful for people who go to meetings. And then I figured out, you know what, that's not true either, because we have lost dozens and dozens of people out of the Asheville community who are going to meetings and who relapse. And when they relapse, they go back to the same dose they were using before, and they die.
Meeting makers make meetings. They don't make it.
Yeah.
They make meetings.
Well, it's a start.
It is a start.
Yeah,
It is.
you know,
but
step 0, don't use, right? Go to meetings, get a sponsor, work the steps on paper. Take the cotton out of your mouth and shove it in your ears. If you do that, that's a good start. But it's just a start. It's not the entire solution. Tell me I'm lying.
You sound like you've heard all this before.
no.
When you were growing up, Jenny, how involved, like how aware of what was going on with your father were you?
So
Guilt, shame.
Like was
Calm yourself.
all this 12-step stuff like
no,
a part
so
of your?
I don't think. So I was born in '86, and so for the first 8-9 years of my life, my dad was sober, and so for the longest time there wasn't an issue, and I didn't know anything about it. He used to have these change jars, and his AA coins would be near the change jars, so like I knew that was a thing. And I remember going to like caduceus with him or meetings with him when I was much younger, and I just like sit underneath like a table and draw and color and stuff. But I wasn't really aware of the chaos at a young age.
Yeah. What about the actual like why you were there?
No.
Just tagging along with
Yeah,
pops.
I just wanted to spend time with my dad.
Yeah.
There is an early memory that I have of him coming home, right, and me sitting in his lap and giving a hug, and him having this specific smell, right? And I didn't know what it was until my first time in rehab. I had some friends come visit me, and one of them was drunk. And I gave him a hug, and I was like, why do you smell like my dad? And I put it together. I was all like, oh, that's what that smell was. I always just had it in my head of like, that's what my dad smells like. But so when I was young, it wasn't very apparent. When I became a teenager, it was a little bit different. I was very involved. I asked for $10 to go to the mall, and I'd get a $50 bill, and then I'd take that $50 bill and go buy weed, right? And then it got to the point of one of my partners, one of my boyfriends at the time, was all like, why don't you just get him to buy it for you? And so I think my boyfriend and my dad started smoking weed together. And that kind of carried into a couple of years of not necessarily using together, but with the same people and at the same time, coming from like the same stash. And so like, I don't know, my story's a little bit different because it's coming from like age 12 to, you know, I'll be 33 next year. No, next month. Fuck, I'm old. And the progression was a lot different. As far as what happened in his life was completely different from mine. So like there were parallels because we were in the same house and I like, he was my father and I grew up with him, but I had many different experiences.
Yeah.
So like the night that he OD'd and woke up in the hospital the next day, I remember him coming home from work that night and we were going to go feed the cats in the cat house. And he said he was going to leave and he'd be right back. And I fell asleep on the couch waiting for him to come back. And when I was woken up the next day, that's when I was told he was in the hospital. But even then, I was just told he had a heart attack. No one told me the truth. So like I knew he was injured and he was hurt. I didn't know it was because of active addiction. And that didn't become apparent until I started using. And when I started using drugs to deal with like my traumas and other things that I had experienced in my life at that time, I mean, yeah, I was a teenager and over emotional or whatever, but there were some things that had happened that, you know, many women experience and no women should. But I mean, like 1 out of 4 women are sexually assaulted, right? So I experienced that at a really young age, and that's one of the things that pushed me towards using. I also experienced death at a really young age. So 13, and the guy I was like totally in love with OD'd and died in my house. And that was just kind of like me off to the races, trying to avoid processing all of the loss that I'd gone through. And then by the time I was 14, a few weeks before my 15th birthday, I was taken advantage of. And this was right before Dad left to go to Mexico, and I got pregnant from that time. And so I think I was like 3 or 4 months pregnant when he left and went to Mexico. And that whole deal happened, right? So this is where like the story really splits off. Like he's in Mexico, I'm going through something completely different. I'm living in a meth house with his ex-girlfriend, my sister, my boyfriend, and the guy who raped me, taking care of a 3-year-old while everyone else was doing meth. 15 at the time, pregnant, taking care of a 3-year-old, complete and total chaos. And I think I was like 7 months pregnant when I decided to go home and live with my mom. And I had my son. He's 17 now. And I continued to like smoke weed and stuff. When I was pregnant, I was completely clean. That was the first time I'd ever gotten clean. And then after I had my son, I was introduced to opiates. Someone was all like, hey, you have all this weed and you're selling this weed. You've got plenty of money, buy these pills. And that's when I was given my answer. I was all like, oh, I don't have to think about this and I don't have to feel this. Pot is fun. This is the answer. And that went really quickly. I hit the bottom of my barrel very fast at that point. By the time I was 18, I was in an abusive relationship, and I found the man hurting my son. So I gave custody of my son to my mom. But my addiction was so strong, I was terrified that if I left him, that I wouldn't be able to get high anymore. So I stayed in a very sick, abusive relationship throughout my active addiction for another 2-3 years. And then I got clean for the first time when I was 19. And by this time, he's in Johnson City doing his residency. I was on probation for filling out fake prescriptions and getting thousands and thousands of fake prescriptions filled. They caught me once. So I was on probation for being a convicted felon and went to rehab because I asked my PO to help me. And my PO and my dad talked about once I get out of treatment. And that's when I moved down to Johnson City, and I got about 9 months clean and fell in love. Right?
Get you every time.
9 months clean and fell in love, and I got pregnant. And 4 months into it, I had a miscarriage. And I was like, oh, there is no God. Fuck the world. And I went back out. And I went back out for another 7 years. And we both lived in the same city at the time, and he helped me a lot. And I got my son back, and I went to college. And I was a functional addict for a long time. I didn't go back to IV drug use.
Was he aware of what was going on?
Of which part?
That you were getting your life back but still using?
I was, it's not a justification. I was like smoking weed and drinking and sometimes taking hallucinogens. I wasn't taking opiates all the time. So I didn't go back to what was fucking killing me.
Yeah.
And I think he was aware that I was smoking weed, but nothing else. And then I had surgery. And when I had surgery, I was all like, look, I'm an opiate addict. You just gave me a bunch of Dilaudid. Now give me Suboxone. And it was total manipulation. I could have just stopped taking the medicine, and then I wouldn't have needed to be on anything. And I was able to get into a clinic to get on the medication. And after I was on the medicine for about 2 or 3 years, some shit went down in South Carolina, and and I got clean for this time, and that was 6 years ago.
Okay.
6 years ago in August.
She went
That's-
to jail.
That's my life in a nutshell.
So
And Daddy wouldn't bail her out.
He did bail me out, and I went to treatment for 90 days.
all right. And you kind of hit on something that's like that I've been very conscious of and aware of in this MAT conversation, and that is the potential for manipulation to pursue Suboxone and methadone. And I think that like having somebody who, number one, has experienced the suffering of addiction and is a person in long-term recovery, and then a bullshit detector as a buffer. Like, I think that what you guys are doing with Reach Recovery, that's one of like the advantages of what you guys are doing, because
Like, I know every trick they're trying to pull.
Yeah.
I can tell when they're trying to sell it. I can tell when they're like they're asking for more because they don't really like. It's like, I'm not stupid. I know you're taking one and trying to sell two. and it's one of the skills that I use. Like when new patients come in, I'm all like, I know what it's like to be a middleman. I know what it's like for people saying, hey, if you give me a ride, I'll give you this. If someone calls you, give them my phone number.
And you know what that's done is we've selected out a group of patients that really want to get better. And those who
Yeah.
were never serious or who are full of shit,
Never stay.
they don't come back. They don't come back. Or they come back, and when they come back, they're ready to get serious because they know
because they know you guys are serious.
that's how we're going to be.
Yeah.
But, you know, back to the original question about MAT and 12-step recovery, and the reality is, all right, that, you know, methadone was a great solution in 1972. It will always have a place for those who are already on it and doing well with it, and it will have a place in inner cities where people can walk and get it. But it is drastically and quickly being supplanted by the buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is much, much safer. It has a ceiling effect. You can't overdose on it. You can take 10 Suboxone at the same time. It's the same as doing 2. You don't get higher. It doesn't last longer. It actually is protective. It binds so tightly to the mu-opioid receptor that if you have buprenorphine in your system and you shoot heroin, you probably are not going to die from it because the heroin will not displace that from the receptor. So there's tremendous advantage to the buprenorphine molecule. If you were to take it and give it away nationwide free at every drugstore, the mortality from opiate addiction would drop by 70%. Now, I don't advocate for that, right? Because I think that addiction is a biopsychosocial spiritual disease that requires neural repatterning and reprogramming of the brain. However, from a public health perspective, medication-assisted therapy with buprenorphine is the solution, part of the solution, right? The fact that there are restrictions by the federal government on the number of patients that a physician can see, there's plenty of doctors out there that are licensed to prescribe buprenorphine, but only about 30% of them actually do. The other 70% are scared shitless by the DEA and the Department of Justice.
And why is that? Why are there restrictions on it?
This is a really good question. Why are there restrictions on it? At this juncture, with my present position with Watauga Recovery Center and Reach Recovery, I don't want to go
Probably
too
not,
deep
yeah.
into it.
Is it
but
is it fear of?
They're
is it,
trying to kill off a generation of drug addicts, and they're doing it. They're restricting access to addicts who need the help. It's not about trying to keep it off the street. It's not about trying to fight the opioid epidemic, because it's the solution to the opioid epidemic. They're restricting that, and therefore encouraging an entire generation of people to die.
I didn't say that.
I didn't hear
Oh
that.
no, I did.
But you know, it's interesting that people who get stabilized on medication-assisted therapy, they get their jobs back. They pay their taxes. They take care of their families. They pay off their fines. They get their driver's licenses back. They become active, productive members of society. They no longer commit those crimes. And if they don't commit crimes, then we can't have them on probation and parole and have them incarcerated in for-profit prisons. So I wonder why they would not want to have an entire generation of people successfully be treated with buprenorphine. It's a question worth asking.
It is a question worth asking.
Conspiracy.
So I asked it.
Conspiracy. Yeah, I don't know. Outside of fear of what I would say, because of like the stigma surrounding this opioid epidemic, the stigma of potential abuse, even though it's clearly
here's the reality. You know, all that conspiracy theory aside, there is a significant number of people who think that buprenorphine is simply replacing one drug with another. All right, they don't understand the disease of addiction. Addiction is not a disease; it's a sin. Right, and sinners have to go to hell, but before they go to hell, they have to go to jail. Right, and so if you have that as a philosophy, if you're thinking that, then all this nonsense that all of these, you know, World Health Organization and National Institutes of Health and the Substance Abuse and Health Administration and every major entity that deals with addiction in the country and the world that says that addiction is a disease process of the brain, all of those people are idiots, because these people need to go to jail.
yeah.
Because of Jesus.
Oh, no, don't you do that.
Sorry, I'm
I mean,
sorry.
Don't you do that.
The proof is in the data,
It quite
and I don't
clearly-
understand how it's right there. So what are the restrictions? Like what are you limited on as far as what you can and can't do?
Well, I mean, it's shocking. 10 years ago, if you signed up to get permission to prescribe this medicine, you could only see 30 patients at a time in the first year. In the second year, that number went up to 100. Right now, in this country,
they don't have enough doctors to cover the 70-something thousand people who are dying
well,
here.
we petitioned Health and Human Services back in 2015 to change the number, and we actually petitioned for it to go to 500. Because we filed a formal petition, they were required to respond, and part of that response was the ability to go to 275 for board-certified physicians and for other circumstances. Even at 275, there aren't enough providers. Only 30% of active opiate addicts in this country have access to medication-assisted therapy.
Yeah.
It's an outrage. If this was HIV, and there you had 10,000 people lined up to get medication to save their lives, and you had doctors willing to treat them, and you had the government that says, nope, you can only take care of 275 AIDS patients at a time. Sorry, the rest of them are just going to have to tough it out. How do you think that would go over in
It
this
would
country?
not go over well at all. They'd have social justice warriors
You think?
tearing down the White House.
It's time.
Yeah.
But the stigma is just so great on addiction and like mental health. Like there's a huge stigma against addicts because it is seen as a moral failing, instead of like something that needs to be treated as a medical issue.
I do agree with you. However, I would like to ask Dr. Tom, have you seen a shift in that stigma? Because I've done 70 podcasts. I am super active outside in the recovery world on campus and all over. And that's like the number one, I almost want to say buzzword that everybody leans towards is this stigma. And so like, have you seen a shift in that?
There has been a dramatic shift in the past 8 years. It started with a March on Washington by facingaddiction.org, where Joe Walsh and Steven Tyler and others, a litany of Hollywood and big names got up on the stage and said, I am also an addict. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And that really started the wave. If you've never looked at Facing Addiction, you should look at it. It's amazing. And sure, now everyone's kind of catching on. Now, it's funny that a lot of these state agencies were adamantly opposed to medication-assisted therapy because Medicaid was going to have to pay for the medicine. And when the federal government came up with $1 billion last year or 2 years ago,
We turned it down.
magically, all the states were going, we've always believed in medication-assisted therapy. We want our $350 million. And the money started pouring into the states. Now, I say that tongue-in-cheek. It's entirely true. I say it tongue-in-cheek. I don't care how we increase access to care, right? The federal government gives money to the states give money to the mental health facilities who don't have any idea what they're doing, but they're learning. The money goes into the methadone industry so that they can convert patients into the buprenorphine model, right? All of the major methadone providers saw the writing on the wall 10 years ago, said, okay, we need to be able to step up and do this medication-assisted therapy with buprenorphine. Dramatic shift.
So it almost sounds like much of this, had they reacted 10 years ago, could have been prevented.
We were on the housetops 10 years ago, pulling our hair out and screaming.
So what about this Medicaid expansion in the state of North Carolina and like the discussions on that? Is that something that is affecting people receiving medication-assisted treatment?
Well, let's just look at one of the model programs in the country. A gentleman named Hughes Melton up in the state of Virginia pioneered a program called the Virginia Arts Program. This opened up addiction treatment for Medicaid providers. It's a phenomenal program. It there's some restrictions and requirements on it that I didn't agree with, but good people can disagree. But as a result of that program, they have completely opened up access to care for all Medicaid participants. The problem right now is there's waiting lists at all of the art-certified facilities. So like if you go to the Revita Clinic in Wytheville or Abingdon, they've got a 2-month waiting list. They don't have enough physicians that are qualified to be able to take care of those patients. And you can't hire physicians. Recruiting physicians was always the hardest part of the job.
And is that because of the buy-in on MAT?
No, it's because of the stigma and the fear of the DEA and the fear of the Department of Justice cracking down somehow and ruining their lives and ruining their careers. So trying to get physicians to be able to take that risk. And they're actively out there trying to get doctors to get their X numbers, and doctors just don't want to do it. There has to be a shift in that regard as well.
Yeah.
But this Virginia Arts Program has completely opened up access to care to literally tens of thousands of patients. Hopefully we'll see the same thing in North Carolina.
And also I think like a shift in just educating young people who are pursuing medical licensure, like your daughter who's talked about going to school and things like that. People who are already on board, people who have been through the system, and people who understand the research behind MAT and understand like the significance of this model in assisting individuals to find recovery.
Well, the leader in that field is the American Society of Addiction Medicine. If you go to asam.org, that for the last 50 years, they have been the leaders in addiction medicine. In the last 10 years, they've been actively pushing for residencies and fellowships in addiction medicine, board certification in addiction medicine, and bringing this awareness you're talking about to the public. They've done amazing work.
Yeah. So can we spend some time talking about like maybe the science behind the buprenorphine model and like what?
Well, you got to know how to say the word.
I know you keep saying it.
It's
Buprenorphine.
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 It's actually buprenorphine.
Buprenorphine.
We won't quibble.
Buprenorphine.
Buprenorphine.
If I had a whiteboard,
Yes.
I can't think without a whiteboard.
Yes, you can.
All right, I can use my hands.
You can use your hands. Face the
All
camera.
right. In your brain, you've got opiate receptors, right? They're the mu-opioid receptors. Those opiate receptors have a compound that fits perfectly in them. It's called endogenous morphine. Endogenous means from within. Morphine, you know what that means. Endogenous morphine.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, we know what that means. That would be endorphin. Endorphin, endogenous morphine. Fits perfectly in that receptor. It sends a signal to your body and your brain that you feel okay. Now, normal people walking around outside out there, earth people, you know, they've got about 50% of these receptors filled at any one time, and they just feel normal. Addicts don't ever feel normal. They hurt, they ache, they don't like crowds, they're not comfortable in their own skin. Until they take that first opiate, and they're ready to go dancing, right? Normal person, they take an oxy, they go home and go to bed.
They go to sleep.
We take an oxy, we go home and clean the garage, right? We feel normal. Well, buprenorphine is a partial agonist. That means it binds sideways in that receptor. It sends a signal to your body and your brain that you feel okay, right? You don't tweak, you don't get pill sick, you don't chill. At the same time, you don't get high. It's not a great buzz, all right? 95% of addicts will tell you, I don't take Suboxone to get high. I take Suboxone to feel normal, right?
To not be dope sick.
And every addict that I propose that to says that word, all right? Now, let's give the caveat to that. If you're a 14-year-old kid and you've never taken a narcotic and somebody gives you Suboxone, you're going to get high.
Yeah.
And it can become your primary drug of abuse.
And is that because those receptors have never been activated before?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And there are people who their only drug of abuse is buprenorphine. And they really like the mono product, meaning the Subutex, which is buprenorphine by itself, because it can be injected. And it's a primary drug of abuse in Appalachia. We have been the strongest advocates for getting Subutex off the market for the last 10 years, right? And we were able to get legislation passed both in Tennessee and in Virginia to limit the amount of the mono product that's given because it goes into people's arms. And if you're a doctor and you're hearing this, stop writing it. It's going into people's arms. They get it for $1.50 at the pharmacy. They drive to Harlan, Kentucky and sell it for $60. And these are people who are either knowingly or unwittingly contributing to the problem. So there is a problem. 2% of the patients who use buprenorphine abuse it, all right? So 98% of the people who use it, it does not get them high. It doesn't impair your driving. It doesn't impair your cognition. We have buprenorphine patients who work in the mines, who work in factories. It's completely acceptable. You can't get a DUI for driving on buprenorphine. You're not supposed to. It does happen sometimes. If you've been taking it for a regular period of time, it doesn't cause sedation, it doesn't cause impairment. It has a ceiling effect, right? So you go, oh boy, let's have a buprenorphine party and we'll all snort 10 of them, right?
Right.
Well, guess what? Anything more than 2, you're pissing it down the toilet, right? So it doesn't help to take more. It has a ceiling effect. And it, like I mentioned before, it has the protective effect that once it binds in that receptor, it binds so tight that if you do an oxy or you do a Lortab, or even if you shoot heroin, you don't get a buzz. And that causes what's called extinction of the behavior in a psychological term. And so people quit doing it, you know, and they'll come in and maybe their third visit, doc, I've snorted an oxy. I look at him and I say, yeah, well, how'd that go for you? I'm not going to fire him. You know, it's like I'm shocked again. They snorted an oxy. Somebody call the preacher. We need to do an exorcism, right? A drug addict did a drug.
I always ask, how did that make you feel? They're like, I didn't feel anything. I feel stupid. It's like, yeah, you threw away $60, didn't you? And they were like, yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, so what can we do next time?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the science behind it. And not only that, it has a 30-hour half-life. That means that if you take a dose in the morning and your blood level goes up to a 10, in 30 hours, it'll be at a 5. That's basically what a half-life means. So if you take it on a regular basis, what you get is a nice, steady blood level. And if you stop taking it, you don't get pill sick tomorrow. You don't even get real pill sick the day after tomorrow. It takes that long for it to wash out of your system.
Where you get dope sick off of heroin within like 4 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, which has a half-life of 4 hours. Exactly. And so you're able, once you get someone stabilized.
Manageable.
Well, once you get them stabilized, it's entirely possible to cut the dose down in small increments. I've gotten hundreds of people successfully and completely off of Suboxone and especially off of benzodiazepines. You know, benzodiazepines are the real nightmare. That's killing way more people. Suboxone, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's a single case study, reported case of somebody dying from just buprenorphine alone, except small children, all right? There's cases in Finland and there's cases in France where people were injecting high doses of buprenorphine with IV Xanax and died. Yeah, well, if you're going to shoot up a bunch of Xanax and bup, you're probably going to die. But from therapeutic dosing, show me the bodies, show me the studies, show me the case studies. It ain't there. People don't die from buprenorphine.
Because
Now,
people can take methadone and then take an oxy and still get high. And then they take a Xanax and then they do OD. And methadone and Suboxone are so closely related that everyone thinks it's the same thing. And like he said, once you take a Suboxone, you cannot get high. Whereas with methadone, you dose in the morning, 6 hours later you take your oxy, and then you go to bed with alcohol and Xanax, and you die.
and you're dead. Yeah. So methadone really is a dying drug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what about the individual? I mean, it's obviously going to have to stick around because of all the individuals who have been taking it for so long.
There, like I said, there is a place for methadone, right? And I'm not saying that we should pull
But
methadone.
this current, again, epidemic that they call it, like this current situation that we find ourselves in, this is the overall most practical approach to it.
Yeah, it certainly is the most practical approach. There are certain people that can't tolerate buprenorphine. There are certain people that you can't trust with buprenorphine. You know, that they're shooting their buprenorphine.
I knew people who would get it and then go and sell it and then buy heroin.
Exactly.
Or trade it for heroin.
Which
or
is why
whatever
we
they
drug
would do.
test our patients every week.
And so that was what I was getting up to, is like, what's the process, right? Somebody contacts Reach Recovery, or like, what is the, like, run me through it, like.
So when someone calls, I set them up an appointment for a Tuesday, because that's the day we see patients. And they come in and they fill out their paperwork, and we get them all checked in. And then they sit down with me, and I go through all of our rules and expectations of like, make your appointment, don't be an asshole to the pharmacist, keep your medicine locked up. If you're still running on the streets and people are calling you for being a middleman, give them our phone number, because you're in treatment now and you can't help them, but we can, kind of thing. And then I go through their drug use history and get all the pertinent information for the doctor, who asks all the same questions anyways, I think. I'm not sure. I'm never in there when they do the medical part. And I really work at making them feel welcome and understanding the rules and having them understand my role. I tell them I'm a built-in bullshit detector. And I tell them that I'm their advocate, and that I tell them that, you know, I'm here to hold hope for you because I used to be in your seat. And then they go in and they see the doctor for 10, 15 minutes. And then we give them drug screens. And first screen's almost always dirty. And then they're given 6 weeks to stabilize. Within that first 6 weeks, being a recovering addict and working with addicts for a large part of my life, I understand that, you know, using drugs is normal for a drug addict, which is why they're given 6 weeks to stabilize.
And what is that? What do you mean by that, by stabilize?
If they give us a dirty drug screen within that 6 weeks, it doesn't count against them immediately.
Don't use the word dirty anymore.
I'm sorry, a positive drug screen. If it's a positive drug screen, they're not immediately
Removed from the program.
Exactly. They get that 6 weeks. And then after 6 weeks, if they give
6 weeks is a fair amount of time to.
well,
Yeah.
that's 6 appointments.
Actually, government tips 42, and other government agencies say 3 to 6 months.
Okay. So
So we're 6 weeks is
we're in there.
we're pushing them.
Yeah.
And I always tell them, is like, you have 6 weeks. That does not give you 6 weeks to go get high until you get your stuff
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. And
Because if they get 4 clean screens, they can go up to biweekly and then
Gotcha.
come every other week.
So this, how much of that conversation, right, when you're prepping them for it and you're talking about the 6 weeks and kind of screening them, how much of the conversation is about all the other things that we previously talked about tonight about sustaining their recovery? Like, how much of the recovery conversation is incorporated into that?
So I've got an entry pamphlet, right? And it talks about making your appointment. And then I go into my spiel about doctor takes care of the body. We have to take care of the mind. One of the things we're going to do while we're here is changing old behaviors. And this is a suggestion. Here's a meeting list. And so I give them 12-step meeting schedules. And I go through the process of doctors taking care of the body. We have to take care of the mind. Here are some ways to do that. But on their first appointment, half of them are dope sick.
Yeah.
They don't feel well, or they're already high from their morning dose of whatever they took off the street. So I introduce it, and I'm all like, this is a suggestion. It's not a requirement. I just want you to be aware that this is the direction we're going to go when you stabilize in your treatment. And then I kind of just go through the rest of the rules.
Yeah.
I don't really push it hard on the first appointment because, like, most of them just want to feel better in that moment.
But in a follow-up appointment.
Yeah, their next
more,
appointment, that's when I start really going into it. And I'm all like, okay, so, what was the best part of your week? Lots of open-ended questions of asking how things are going and, like, what have you noticed change? And then sometimes I'll sneak in there, so have you tried any new tools for your recovery this week? And then they're like, no, I got in a fight with my girlfriend, blah, 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 and I just called my drug dealer. And I'm like, you could pick up the phone and call another person in recovery. They're like, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Things they don't normally think of. And, along the same lines on the intake, you asked earlier about what about diversion. A study just came out that shows the vast majority of diverted buprenorphine is used for exactly what it's designed for, which is to prevent people from being pill sick and to treat the disease of addiction. So the amount of diverted bupe for abuse is shockingly small. 80% of our patients, 90 maybe, that come into our clinic are already on buprenorphine.
They're just on street buprenorphine.
They're on street bupe. They've been on oxy. Somebody gave them a bupe because they were pill sick, and they said, "Wait a minute."
So they like almost like.
And then they go, "Wait a minute! I'm spending $50 a day to buy street bupe. Let's do the math here. Maybe I should just go to a facility and actually get treatment."
Have that first taste of like relief.
Let me give you an interesting story. It's a little bit of an aside, but back in 2013, I had several patients come in all the way in from the middle of West Virginia, Welch and Bradshaw. And I was a little bit suspicious of it, and so I finally, once I told my story and I confronted him and I got down to the bottom, he said, "Well, in West Virginia, there's nobody that prescribes buprenorphine. We don't have any treatment at all." So the guy that used to deal the oxys, what he does is he sends out about 10 guys a week to go out and to lie to the buprenorphine doctors down in Virginia and Tennessee. And they go down, they're writing them 3 a day, and they bring them back up here, and then he sells them to the oxy addicts. He was running a de facto drug treatment center to make money and paying the guys to go down there and pick up the bupe, paying them cash and paying their gas and their food.
Because the healthcare providers can't open up their own.
So the drug dealer, well, if everyone's going to be on buprenorphine, I might as well be the guy making the money off of it.
Holy cow.
That's a true story.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's absolutely crazy.
That was just 5 years ago.
Yeah. And that's what I kind of hinted at, like how much progress has been made in a short period of time regarding MAT, right? Like just 5 or 6 years ago, in this immediate local area, it was something that was very kind of shunned upon and not even really discussed. And now I'm taking a class this semester where our entire college textbook is specifically, the entire book is on MAT and on all of the different options and the way that it works on the brain and that sort of thing.
Well, shout out to the CARA Act. Shout out to Patrick Kennedy. Shout out to those who pushed the legislation through. And the federal government finally got it. Now they just need to get that information down to the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about like in like rural areas, like ours specifically? Like if somebody,
There's an excellent clinic in Waynesville.
yeah, but like
Outstanding.
we're like a half an hour away. So like you're in early recovery, you don't have transportation, you lost your license, sold your car, whatever's going on. Like it's difficult for people to get out to Waynesville. And then they have a pretty strict program from what I understand. So it's like you gotta do the daily. You gotta go out there daily for I can't remember how many weeks consecutively and do well with it before you're
Before you're
allowed
even
to take home.
started.
Before you're allowed to take home, yeah. And so like
we
a lot of people
actually-
fail out because they can't just keep up with that type of program and show up there at 7 o'clock in the morning.
We get a
'cause-
lot of patients who have failed out of that program.
Uh-huh.
Because we're not a daily clinic of show up every morning to get your dose at our office. It's kind of like we're handing you a prescription so you can get your life back.
Yeah.
You wake up and take your medicine and put your child on the bus and have breakfast with your wife before you go to work, instead of spending all that time driving out to the clinic to get your dose to come back. And there's a lot of patients that are really surprised. They're like, wow, this is a completely different program that I've never seen
I'm surprised
before.
because I've known everybody that I've known in the 5 years that I've lived here has gone to that specific one out in Haywood County and experienced. Some have experienced great success, and they go out there for the 5 or 6 weeks that they have to on the daily. They earn their take homes and they have their life back.
But there's some people,
and some people that can't do
that
that
daily.
Correct. Correct.
And so, like, we've definitely taken in a lot of patients who are like, so this place was suggested to us by them.
Okay. So what's the difference? Why are they so strict? Why are other agencies have so many other restrictions? It's the same fear of.
Well, I also think that it's a matter of licensing. Like, you have to have a specific kind of insurance to have medications on site, which is not something we do. We don't have any medications on site. We have, like there's a prescription that you take to the pharmacy instead of us handling medicine and giving it to you.
Are there specific pharmacies that your patients have to go to receive it?
Every pharmacy
Do they?
carries buprenorphine.
Because I knew patients back home in Florida that the pharmacies were no longer stocking the medication because
We fought that battle back in 2014, 2015, especially in Kentucky, where pharmacists were openly and blatantly discriminating against people with the disease of addiction. We had one pharmacy that says, yeah, we'll take care of those patients, but they have to show up at 6 o'clock and they come to the back door.
what does that mean?
Meaning that they wouldn't allow them to come into
Over
the
counter.
pharmacy.
They didn't want the
They would hand them their prescriptions
Oh,
out the
God.
back door.
But you could go get your 90 oxy 80s
Oh,
without a
anytime.
problem.
Oh, yeah.
But try to get some help, and all of a sudden it's an issue.
Wow.
There's only a few pharmacies that actually have any issues, and it's a lot worse in Tennessee. There's a lot of pharmacists that try to dictate treatment plans. And in North Carolina, like, the pharmacists have been amazing. I think Walmart nationwide decided to fight the opiate epidemic by not filling buprenorphine prescriptions.
Yeah, go figure that. What's that all
But
about?
they would fill your oxys and Lortabs.
Wow.
But Walmart stopped filling buprenorphine prescriptions altogether nationwide. And I think that's the only pharmacy we've ever had an issue with.
Yeah.
Because they don't want those kind of people in their store.
Well, those kind of people are in their store
Yeah,
stealing
anyways,
shit off the
stealing-
shelf to go buy
exactly.
heroin or whatever. I said that. Sorry.
Well, when we first started opening, when we opened out in rural Virginia, and there was a lot of not in my backyard, right? Well, we don't want those kind of people coming into our town. And the answer was, those people are already in your town.
They are your people.
Matter of fact, they're coming to Johnson City to see me. That's why we need to put a clinic in your town.
It's your brothers and sisters. It's your family.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing.
So people are waking up. It's just been a long, hard battle.
And I really believe that when I take a step back and I look at like the entire situation objectively, is that like it takes just this human experience that we're all like figuring out as we live and grow. Is it takes us culturally, being human beings, it takes us a long time to learn, to figure things out collectively together, to learn how to work together. It takes us a very, very long time, right? We're still dealing with the effects of slavery and segregation and things like that 200 years later, right? We still haven't figured that part of this human experience out. So like, I think that what we've seen in those 10 or 15 years, 10 years has been pretty dramatic in comparison to so many other like social issues.
Well,
I really
you
do think
lose
so.
140,000 people. You have to figure that the war on drugs is a total failure. We need to take Harry Anslinger and put him back in the grave and leave him there. If
The
you haven't
6
read
years?
Chasing the Scream with Johann Hari,
Yes, I have.
well, I'm sure you have.
I have.
And we're still in the middle of that philosophy and that thinking that somehow we're going to have a war on a substance. This is a war on people.
Yeah.
This is an active war on people with a disease.
Yeah. That was a great book. He was on Joe Rogan's podcast about a month or two ago, and it was just like 3 hours of him just like,
I'd love to
pitching
meet him
all of his
sometime. I
ideas.
haven't had a chance.
yeah. What was that? So yeah, I just think it takes time. I think that it takes time to learn, and we've made some significant changes. You know, the one thing that it's so weird because like so many people like, and I don't know if it's just because we meaning us in this room and everyone that sits in that chair that you're sitting in, or we all live in this recovery world, and like my life is around people in recovery, and that's just like that's what I need to do to stay sober, obviously. But
Sure.
Everybody says that, right? Everybody says we can't arrest our way out of it. We can't arrest our way out of it. We all know it, but why can't we? What's stopping us from electing individuals who will follow through with legislature that is consistent with our collective understanding?
I think there's a difference between belief
Yeah.
and understanding experience. And there's a lot of people who have beliefs that aren't really based on any kind of experience or fact.
Yeah.
They're beliefs based on hearsay. And those are the people that are hard to corral in, where the people who do have understanding from experience, like there's more and more of us, but then there's a bunch of us that are dying.
Yeah.
So even though there is the understanding and experience, there's those people with the understanding and experience don't have any power. We don't have any power yet. But there's, we're like marginalized. Like we don't have the power or the strength to be able to make the moves that you're talking about. And I think a lot of it is based on the belief of it being a moral failing, or there's something wrong with us.
Circling back to stigma.
Exactly.
And things like that.
And that's what's holding us back as far as that goes, is the belief is more spread than the understanding of experience.
But as more and more politicians' children die,
Yeah. And people, young people, because that's another thing is that like I found recovery at 32 years old, right? But I meet so many people, especially because of this opioid situation. I meet so many people who find recovery at 21 years old. There's like an entire generation of young people finding recovery. That's why they're opening up recovery high schools
There's
and
only
things like
half
that.
of them, though, because the other half are dead.
Didn't make it, yeah. But those people are going to grow up and have this long-term sustained recovery and become our leaders, right?
Exactly.
They're going to be, hopefully, right? And then also like people like you and me and people that I've talked to, like we can run for local political offices and things like that. Like, you can, dude.
I'm a convicted felon. No one's
So
supposed to do
what?
that.
You can. I think that you can. I think that you can.
But there's great fear if you stand up and take a position on this that, that they're going to come and try to knock you down.
Yeah.
And you have to ask why.
I've always been one to take a non-traditional route. So when people want to come and try to knock me down, I just throw up a big fuck you. And I welcome the challenge. You know what I mean? I totally do. In a perfect world, right? If I could hand Dr. Tom a magic wand and he can solve this problem with his magic wand, what do we need to happen? What do you envision in order to really genuinely give the people who deserve it their lives back? Like, what are the missing pieces to the puzzle? What are we not talking about? What are we not addressing?
I don't know that we're missing any of the pieces of the puzzle. I just don't think we're moving fast enough. This is an opiate epidemic. This isn't like leprosy, which kills you over 40 years. This kills you the moment you put the fentanyl in your arm. And so, absolutely, the government, the American Society of Addiction Medicine are pushing for educating doctors, educating nurses, educating the society. There are naloxone rescue kits that are now, we had to fight in 2013 to get naloxone distributed to our patients. I was one of the first doctors to sign not nationwide, but statewide, to allow pharmacists to distribute naloxone, and then nobody would. And now it's everywhere. So people are pushing, actively saying we've got to do something to stop.
And that's what I mean when there's been significant change in a short period of time.
That's one thing that I want everyone who's listening to know is that in the state of North Carolina, there is a standing prescription at every pharmacy that you can walk in and ask for a naloxone kit. You probably have to pay for it or use your insurance for it. But there's a standing prescription statewide.
Okay.
That anyone can walk into a pharmacy and say, I need a naloxone kit, and you can get one.
And we need to deregulate the addiction industry, that doctors can't be afraid to treat the disease of addiction. They can't be afraid that somehow the government or that their careers are going to be put at risk because they're trying to take care of people with this disease.
Yeah. What do you think about this death by distribution bill that's been tossed around in the state legislature?
Let's not go there.
Okay.
Because there have been 60 doctors arrested in the tri-state
I'm with
area. There are many doctors that are serving life sentences or 40 or 60-year sentences because they wrote prescriptions for narcotics to patients, and then the patients went home and overdosed. And, they were judged by a jury of their peers. Really, they had 12 doctors judging these doctors. And you got to watch out for the pendulum swing.
Yeah.
There are people with chronic pain that need to be treated and managed. There are bad doctors that overwrite prescriptions. And there has to be a balance between those two. So to attribute an addict's overdose death to a specific physician writing a prescription, you got $1.5 million societal dollars invested in a doctor's education. And you've got 200 doctors that have been put into prison or taken out of circulation. Many of them needed to be, but not all of them.
Yeah.
It's a touchy subject.
Yeah. I guess from many of my harm reduction friends and people that I talk to, the biggest concern is just we've worked so hard to overcome so much of the stigma surrounding harm reduction. We've worked so hard to get Narcan kits distributed all over the state. And, being someone that's comes from Florida and has experienced what happened down there, I've seen significant change in North Carolina. And then the fear of this death by distribution bill being passed and interfering with our current Good Samaritan laws, right? To where drug users will be number one, afraid to administer Narcan, number two, afraid to call 911 because of fear of prosecution.
Right.
And then how does that affect both the individuals who are overdosing, who could potentially find reach recovery, who could potentially experience some relief by the services you guys are offering, but their friends won't pick up the phone because out of fear of prosecution.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. I mean, 5 guys get together, throw in $20, get a couple of points, right? And one guy goes to get it, and 2 of them die because it was mostly fentanyl. And the guy that went to get it gets convicted of first-degree murder and goes to prison.
And the guy he bought it from.
And the guy who bought it.
Yeah. It just seems like it's like taking us 5 or 10 years back on all the work that we've done
It
in a short
completely
period of time.
defeats the purpose
Yeah.
of the Good Samaritan law,
Yeah.
which is just really sad. It's
Yeah.
definitely regression.
I'm going to go far out here, okay, guys?
Go for it.
And if you don't want to talk about it, I'm totally okay with it. Seeing as you're a medical professional and you're currently working with MAT, what do you think about the latest research and stuff surrounding the use of psychedelic drugs in both addiction with like things like ibogaine and ketamine,
I would
depression?
I would like to say that I am not a medical professional.
Okay.
I am just another bozo on the bus with almost 6 years clean.
I ain't nothing but a bozo on buzz.
I have personal opinions about this, not medical professional opinions.
I'm fascinated to hear them. I am. No, I am.
Well, do you want to hear the doctor's opinion?
No, I want you to go first.
Okay, so I think that it makes sense logically. So any kind of hallucinogen or tryptamine changes your perception. Depression, anxiety, addiction is all an issue of perception, right?
Yeah.
And taking a hallucinogen can change that perception just enough to take yourself out of it. When I was a teenager, I wasn't on antidepressants. I took hallucinogens once every 6 months. And it was when I got clean that since I got clean, I stayed off of medication for 2 years. And then after that, I was like, I can't keep doing this. My depression and anxiety is real. And I, sought a medical professional to be put on an antidepressant. Where before I did not, it was not necessary because my personal experience taking tryptamines helped me with my mental health issues.
What were you taking? What kind of?
All of it.
Okay.
It depends. It depends on what I could find. I've taken acid, mushrooms, ketamine, DMT, mescaline, peyote. I think maybe 1 or 2 of the test chemicals, they were terrible. Never do those. But I really think there's some value in the idea of microdosing small amounts of hallucinogens that change your perception just enough to keep you from being suicidal. I think that there's benefits in that.
Yeah.
I really personally do.
Clarify that, because you're specifically saying use of hallucinogens for treatment of depression. And there's clear science and clear evidence that show that that's probably true. Matter of fact, FDA approval and experimental studies, especially with X, with MDA and ketamine. Got ketamine drops and dosing for depression. I personally don't think it's a treatment for chronic dopamine reward deficiency syndrome. Because although you may get a temporary release of dopamine and you may get a change of perception, you're not changing the neurochemistry in the brain.
But so many of those other mental health disorders
can truly affect the addiction piece
and
the behavioral piece of addiction.
And most of the research shows most of those psychedelics do not help with addiction.
Correct. Correct.
The only thing that I've read is they have seen significant results using psilocybin to treat nicotine smoking.
Well, it's all about behaviors.
But that's the
right?
only thing. So close to addiction. It's all about the behavior.
Well, nicotine's the most addictive.
The
substance
hardest. Tell me
known
about
to
it.
man.
God.
But remember that addiction is it's a brain disorder, right? You don't make enough dopamine, your dopamine receptors don't work. The dopamine you make is a little bit defective. There's something wrong with your dopamine system, right? So you always feel like crap.
Yeah.
And so you take an opiate and you feel better, right? And you want to change the way you feel. It's all about changing the way you feel, right? I don't like the way I feel. I'm sad. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I'm fearful. I'm grieving. I don't like the way I feel.
I'm happy. I feel great.
I am going to shove a chemical in my face. And recovery is learning how to feel all of those completely normal, ordinary emotions that everybody on the planet feels without shoving a chemical in your face or your arm. So I'm a little bit hesitant to recommend psychedelics.
I have never tried a psychedelic as a person in long-term recovery, but my experience with them prior tells me that taking a psychedelic removes that I word, and it's no longer like about me, and it's no longer about all of these circumstances. I feel this, I feel that, I am uncomfortable in my skin, I can't live in this world. Like it kind of like allows you to look at the world from a different perspective, right? And kind of take yourself out of the main role of the movie, right? You're no longer the lead character in the movie, and you kind of tend to see things. And I'm not like, listen, I'm not, you're the doctor. You're the doctor.
Let's from a medical perspective, more research needs to be done. It's as simple as that.
That's what I would
And
say.
so I think it should be actively researched. From a spiritual perspective, the real magic is to attain the exact same state and the same feeling through meditation and through conscious contact and through prayer. That's what changes the neurochemistry. You've got 900 known neurochemicals in a human brain, each with dozens of receptors. We understand a little bit about maybe 20 of them. In other words, nobody knows what the fuck's going on in a human brain. Nobody, right? And you start adding chemicals that change the biochemistry in the brain. I mean, psychiatrists, you can try a little bit of this, try a little bit of that. It's all a crapshoot, man, right? Oh, we found this works. Isn't that great? It works to do what? Well, it makes me feel better. I don't know. I've done every psychedelic known to man, and I wouldn't knowingly and willingly ever do another one, personally.
I think the reason that it can, like what you were talking about is like not being the main role of the character, like not the main character anymore. It helps with the idea of connection, right? Like the whole idea of I am one with everything, all of that hippy-dippy stuff, right? But it's been said, I don't know who said it, but the opposite of addiction isn't recovery. The opposite of addiction is connection. And in my experience, taking tryptamines before I got clean was all about connection to the world, to nature, to my community, to my family. During the times of tripping on psychedelics, that is the one thing that rang true, was that true connection. Which is why I can understand why fostering that connection piece is really what has brought addiction into that conversation, more so than just like depression or anxiety or like relationship troubles. MDA used to be prescribed as a marriage counseling medicine.
Yeah. So I back or the beginning of the year, I had a nice lady from MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. She was in Asheville conducting a presentation surrounding the conversation about MDMA assisted psychotherapy to treat PTSD, specifically for PTSD.
I truly believe that.
And that's
work.
they're at the phase 3 clinical trials, and they've been approved by the FDA to move forward, and that's why they're in Asheville, because Asheville has been targeted as a
Well, we have a huge
as
VA
an
hospital
area
here.
to build a MDMA assisted psychotherapy treatment center. And so she was here to actually train therapists on the facilitation of the drugs. And she said the results have just been significant.
Phenomenal.
Like, mind blowing. Like over 3 out of 4 patients in the clinical trials experienced no longer met the criteria for PTSD after completing 3 doses, which is like 1. So they do like a dose, 8-hour facilitation with 2 clinicians. Then they do like a therapy session, then a second dose, then a therapy session, a second dose.
Well, I mean, have you ever taken ecstasy? Have you ever taken
Well, I mean,
MDMA?
not only recreationally.
Well, yeah.
but
so,
yes.
But so even recreationally, there's this
The sense of connection that you described is
there's
yeah.
the connection there, and there's like almost a truth serum, right? And there's a piece where you're processing emotions in a completely different way, which is why I can see why it could be really beneficial for people with PTSD, because a lot of that is going back to a situation, and your body feels the same thing. You re-experience the entire situation, and if you re-experience that entire situation on ecstasy, the process of what's happening would be different.
Yeah.
To where like you're no longer on ecstasy, you go back to that memory. The way your brain has been wired to think about it has been changed because you re-experienced it while under the influence of this
That's
drug.
exactly what she said.
And so like that makes perfect sense. Like, and really promising. It's like kind of fast tracking trauma therapy.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Because like with trauma therapy, it's slowly session over session doing the neural repatterning with specific memories.
Yeah.
And it just takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
Well, I think the actual serotonin dumping probably overwhelms the trauma blocks. That's probably the mechanism by which it works. So, I mean, I think it's awesome for PTSD. I think it should be used in very controlled clinical settings.
Yeah.
I mean, overuse of
psychedelics should be.
ecstasy is pretty scary. You know, you get eblivity.
And it's the same thing on the streets. You got
Oh,
the
yeah.
fentanyl
You never
and all
know
that
what you're
stuff.
actually
Yeah.
getting. You never know what you're actually getting. So pharmaceutical grade MDMA?
Yeah, could you imagine?
hell yeah, right?
But here we are.
Both
Here we
of
are.
you guys need to pick up a white chip.
I
I'm
know.
telling
Here
you
we are,
that.
two addicts, like going down
Talking
the
about
rabbit
it
hole.
is not
Yeah.
anything like
Here we are going down the rabbit hole, and that's what concerns me, because like I've had these conversations with people, and they light up just like you, and they light up. I get excited about it, and it's like at the same time, just like Dr. Tom here just said, is that I'm fascinated with this stuff because I have a history of psychedelic use. I'm fascinated with all of it, right? I'm fascinated with all of it. However, through my daily meditation practice, through my fellowship, through these conversations and the connections that are created at this table right here, my life is stable. I'm straight. There's no need for any of that stuff in my life right now.
Well, I guess you don't have to pick up a white key tag.
Yeah, I'm just interested in it. I'm fascinated with the science behind it and the potential to help people
Have it be a treatment.
who haven't found. I mean, it's taken 5 years and a shitload of hours on the meditation cushion, and you know what I mean. So, like, can it be?
It's a shortcut.
Is it a shortcut? I guess that's the question.
So, I mean, the
Well,
thing
who,
is, like,
who is it that determines a chemical is dangerous? I mean,
That's a
they're
good question.
allowing us to give serotonin reuptake inhibitors, norepinephrine. I mean, you go on and on of all these chemicals that are somehow okay and licensed by the FDA to be given to human beings for whatever reason, but not this chemical. No, this chemical is dangerous. I mean, some of them are.
Yeah.
You know, it's just weird that they have to go through this whole process
Yeah.
to get it approved.
I read a book last summer by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind. Michael Pollan is an agricultural author. He wrote many New York Times bestseller books about food and the food industry and the benefits of green diets and things like that.
his name is Pollen.
Pollan, who would have thought?
That's funny.
But
Cool.
and New York Times bestseller, all this stuff, like very famous author. And so he wrote a book called How to Change Your Mind, where he studied psychedelics for a year. And the point is that he is a very reputable, like old school, not a person like myself who would be promoting drug use, right? And he goes and he starts writing a book investigating the history of psychedelics, and he found such profound information that he decided to try it himself, right? He was sold, right? So he tried it, and it's all in the book. You know, he told the whole entire story, but just to see somebody of his level of experience, kind of stand up for the psychedelic research that's taking place, really kind of like opened my mind and kind of set a precedence to like, hey, this might be something worth investigating a little bit further. Not personally, professionally.
Well, I mean, it's something I've always agreed with.
Yeah.
Like just from personal experience.
Had I known now what I know, what am I trying to say? Had I known then what I know now about the drugs, like I don't know what would have happened when I was using them back in the day. You know, but I guess we say that for any type of.
I mean, whenever I did use those type of drugs, it was always very intentional. It was never like, oh, I just found this, I'm gonna get fucked up, woohoo! It was all like, I need a shift in my perception right now, and I take a few weeks to plan it out and then do it.
Yeah.
It was never like instant, like, oh, let's get a vial of acid. Like it was always like well planned out. There's a reason.
Well, remember that traditionally hallucinogenics go back thousands of years,
Right.
and they're always done in very structured religious ceremonies with an intent and a purpose. A vision quest, a sweat lodge, ayahuasca. I mean, they have a goal and a purpose. And to just randomly take them at parties, that's everyone pop one. It's scary. It's scary. It's dangerous. And, you know, you can't recommend that. From a medical perspective, I think it has a place. And from a spiritual perspective and a religious perspective, I think it has a place. But I like to go back to Ram Dass. Ram Dass talks a lot about using the Sandoz back in the 60s with Abby Hoffman. And you know, he said that you get there and then you go away. And then you get there and then you go away. And he didn't want to do that anymore. And, you know, he actually went over to his guru in India, Maharaji, and said, well, here, Maharaji went to him and said, I hear you brought some medicine from the United States. Give it to me. And Ram Dass hadn't told him.
He didn't know that.
Maharaji just knew. And so he said, okay, well, here you go. Here, take one. And Maharaji took one. He said, give me all of it. So he did like 100 hits, right? And then about an hour later, Maharaji kind of sits around and goes, well, I don't really feel anything, but it's very interesting, and you don't need this anymore. You can do this with meditation.
It's a true story.
And from that point on, Ram Dass focused on meditation as a means for spiritual awakening awareness. And that's what I would advocate.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, listen, guys, we're almost at 2 hours. So.
Whoa!
Sorry.
Does that mean we get to come back?
On that note, I would love to have you guys come back. I'd love to come out and check out what you're doing out there.
Please do.
Maybe do something from your office or something like that. Next time I'll come to you. How about that?
That'd be great.
Yeah, that would be so cool. How can people, if they're interested in additional information about Reach Recovery, if they'd like to come set up an appointment or refer somebody out to you guys, how can they get in touch with you?
So our phone number is 828-654-0115. I have that phone connected to me at all times, so I can always set up an appointment. We also have a webpage. It is reachrecoveryasheville.com. And you can also send me an email at reachrecoveryasheville@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page, Reach Recovery, and we also have an Instagram.
Reach Recovery.
Reach Recovery Asheville.
Kick ass. Well, y'all are awesome. I totally enjoyed this. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much for inviting
Yeah,
us.
thank you.
Tons of fun. I would love to do it again. So thank you guys for checking us out. Y'all have a good night.
All right.